If we respect the environment, it will respect us. So we all have to play our part.
We were really in trouble of losing some species in my lifetime. And this can wreak havoc on the balance of the ecosystem.
People need nature, and people must take care of nature.
I am part of the next generation that have to make sure that this place survives.
It is our responsibility as the two-leggeds to try to foster good relationships with the earth. And it's beginning now.
Humanity is at a fork in the road. The lives of future generations will be shaped by the choices we make now. It is time for us to protect the crucial diversity of life on this planet or watch the world crumble. In America, saying all lives matter is considered insensitive. But in the context of every living thing on the globe, every animal, every plant, every insect, they are all critical to the rich tapestry of this world. And we all depend on each other. In this case, all lives matter is a clarion call to protect every living species, because the biodiversity of this world is the bedrock of our economies, our health, our water, our food supply, and our home. Our future depends on us getting this right. And there's still time. But if we don't act now, future generations will look back on our mistakes and say, why didn't you do something? And we won't be able to say, we didn't know. If the public and private sectors can band together and invest enough to ensure the natural world is better off in 2030 than it is today, then we will have risen to the challenge. If not, we will have failed our grandchildren. Today, you will hear from an important group of people from around the world, from government, from business, from the philanthropic world, people who can help us understand what we can do right now. First, let's hear how today's conversation fits into the ongoing negotiations in the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Treaty on Nature Protection.
Distinguished participants, dear colleagues, greetings. It's my honor to welcome such a great panel on such an important issue. Next year, we'll see an ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be agreed at the UN Biodiversity Conference in China. The successful implementation of the post-2020 framework relies on the mobilization of additional resources and the reduction or redirection of existing $500 billion causing harm to biodiversity, including negative incentives or subsidies. $100 billion relates only to agriculture. This financing needs to come from all actors: the government, the businesses, the financial sector, philanthropists, civil society, and others. That is why it is encouraging to have all of you gathered here today. Hopefully, your discussions will motivate further deliberations and especially commitments to help close the biodiversity funding gap. I wish all of you a great event.
In order to protect biodiversity on a global scale, governments need to develop policies that safeguard biodiversity, commit a meaningful percentage of their GDP to environmental protection, and create incentives for the private sector to invest in nature. Let's hear what some of them have to say.
Dear friends, colleagues, and partners from all over the world, 2020 was supposed to be the super year for nature. Instead, we find ourselves fighting a deadly pandemic that has brought tremendous suffering to millions across the globe and that has turned our economies upside down. My heart goes out to everyone affected. While the pandemic dominates our day-to-day life, we must remember that two other existential threats already have a foot in the door: the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. No vaccine can be developed against these crises, and humanity already feels their devastating effects every single day. It is our responsibility as decision makers in government, in business, in civil society, academia, to look ahead and prepare for what lies beyond the immediate horizon. For far too long, we have treated our natural habitat as a bottomless source. But as long as we keep destroying nature at this which is an unprecedented rate, we continue to place our own health and well-being at ever greater risk, and the pandemic is proof of that. The pandemic has taught us how directly our own health and the health of the natural ecosystems are intertwined. It has forced our worlds to a grinding halt. But it has also offered us the chance to take a deep breath and think, what world do we want to live in the future? What world do we want to see our children and grandchildren grow up in? I'm convinced that most people would agree we have to fundamentally rethink the course of our economic development and rebalance our relationship with our natural environment. I'm also convinced that people want to emerge from this crisis with a greener, healthier, and more inclusive future ahead. This is why I call on all leaders to commit to protecting at least 30% of the planet by 2030. It is a goal that is firmly grounded in scientific evidence. We've already proposed to apply it for the European Union in our 2030 biodiversity strategy. I also call on all government and business leaders to significantly step up their investments in nature and biodiversity. The 30% target, backed up by strong financial support for nature, is at the same time an environmental imperative and a great opportunity to improve our health and help our economies transition to a sustainable economy. We are spending enormous amounts of money for our recovery. We have one chance, and one chance only, to get it right, to spend it on where we want it to be tomorrow. Committing substantial financial support for biodiversity and choosing to invest in nature restoration will help create the sustainable job and business opportunities we all need. It can be done, it should be done. At the end of the day, this is not about saving the planet. She did rather well before we came along. She will do well without us. This is about a healthier and better life for us and for those who come after us, our children and grandchildren. This is about nothing less than saving humanity itself. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, best regards from Germany. The Nature Finance Forum comes at just the right time. We have to invest in our survival. The diversity of species, ecosystems, and genes is the greatest asset of our planet. The Nature Finance Forum is sending exactly the right messages. We need an ambitious agreement for nature. We can only protect biodiversity together through efforts around the world. The investments we make today will determine the chances of survival. COVID-19 is a wake-up call for all of us, for the whole world. We realize that we will hardly be able to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and the decisions of the Paris Agreement without biodiversity. As long as we reduce the world's gene pool, we will increase poverty, hunger, and diseases. Without a species-rich environment, there can be no sustainable development. The greatest biodiversity can be found in developing countries. People there depend on biodiversity for their livelihoods. The developing countries lack financial mechanisms for biodiversity protection. That is why Germany is investing €500 million a year in protecting biodiversity in developing countries. We will increase our contribution, but that will not be enough. A global financial framework requires a lot of money from many different sources. In addition to public funding, we need more private funding. New and innovative financing models are needed to combine public and private contributions. One innovative instrument is the Legacy Landscape Fund. We will launch this fund together with other public and private donors, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, UNESCO, and international nature conservation organizations. Through the fund, we will provide long-term finance for the most important protected areas in developing countries and preserve biodiversity and natural habitats. I want to invite you to contribute to the Legacy Landscape Fund. You can all make a difference. I wish your forum every success. Thank you so much.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to participate in such an important event. We are living in truly destabilizing times, facing 3 crises at once. We are living through one of the major health crises our humanity has confronted. Also a biodiversity crisis where 1 million species are threatened with extinction, many within only decades. And a climate crisis where climate models show that we are approaching a point of no return. But all of these crises are interconnected. We need to come together across all sectors in an integrated global effort to forge a path forward and reverse this trend. That starts with imagining new ways of living, analyzing what works, and then banking great ideas with political will, clear goals, adequate resources and capacity, and bringing the whole world in behind this reconstruction and transformation towards a more equal and resilient economy. As a middle-income country, we have always faced financial challenges. Therefore, we had to come out with creative solutions, taking the responsibility to act with national policies. We have promoted conservation through innovative financing mechanisms, which have helped to reverse forest loss and preserve biodiversity. Now, we aim to take biodiversity loss and climate change into account in macroeconomic policy, fiscal planning, budgeting, public investment management, and procurement practices. We implemented national policies such as taxes to fossil fuels, and we channeled these funds towards protected areas and environmental services. The positive result of such policies has been outstanding. Costa Rica has achieved a forest cover of 52% of its territory, and our national parks offer a wide range of ecosystemic services that boosts the well-being of our communities as well as our GDP. Nonetheless, we urgently need more action, and my country is willing to go further. Costa Rica is championing the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, together with France and over 30 countries, with the clear goal to protect 30% of marine and terrestrial areas by 2030. The world has a moral and pragmatic imperative to come together in the next year to agree to a new global agreement for nature, with ambitious goals, bold actions, and increased resources for biodiversity from public and private financing. If we achieve that, we will be one step closer to a healthy, stable, and prosperous planet.
Thank you to the UN and the Weiss Campaign for Nature for organizing this event. Canadians are fortunate to have an abundance of nature right in our backyards, a gift that comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility to protect it. Our first peoples lived in harmony with nature and continue to hold vital knowledge about the path we must take in the future to restore a healthy relationship with nature in this time of climate change and biodiversity collapse. Canada has the oldest National Park Service in the world. We have been pleased to host the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity since its inception. We are also honored to serve as co-chair of the group of countries at the convention that are negotiating the next strategic plan for the future of the world's biodiversity. Because of the urgency of reversing the loss of nature, we are pleased to join the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, which calls for protecting at least 30% of the world's land and ocean by 2030. Canada is uniquely positioned to contribute to this important goal both at home and abroad. We have both the responsibility and the opportunity. We have the second largest landmass, a fifth of the world's fresh water, and the longest coastline in the world that, together, are critical for biodiversity and for securing carbon in nature in the fight against climate change. Our forests, grasslands, and peatlands absorb enormous amounts of carbon pollution and are one of our best allies in protecting our climate. We will work with Indigenous peoples, other levels of government, as well as private landowners, business, and civil society to achieve our goals. As an example of our major efforts at home, last summer our government announced more than $250 million for the protection of two globally significant Arctic marine areas, Talrutiop-Imanga and Tuveyutuk. Combined, these two areas cover more than 427,000 square kilometers, larger than the landmass of Germany. As a result, Canada exceeded its marine conservation commitment of 10% early and worked directly with Inuit to demonstrate how new approaches to Indigenous-led conservation can create jobs through Indigenous guardians and park management, as well as build local infrastructure for nearby communities. The world must substantially increase the amount of funding available to protect nature and to prevent the release of carbon from natural systems. We must also ensure financial resources are available to every country to sustainably manage protected areas and ensure that Indigenous peoples and local communities benefit. At this critical time in history, when the world is confronted by the triple threat of climate change, biodiversity collapse, and a global pandemic, we need to come together as a global community. We need to work together to ensure that the future is equitable, carbon neutral, and nature positive. Canada will do its part, both at home and abroad.
Dear friends, our safety net is stretched almost to a breaking point. Biodiversity loss constitutes a direct threat to human well-being in all regions of the world. Global warming is on the rise as one of the main causes of biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss also makes global warming go faster. It's time to turn the tide. We need increased ambitions on emission reductions and biodiversity recovery. Stepping up ambitions also means stepping up contributions and efforts. We need a transition into a sustainable economy based on green supply chains. We have to be innovative in our thinking. We have to mobilize resources from all sources. The high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy are currently working on a transition agenda. Now, more than ever, we need a healthy ocean to provide key ecosystem services and benefits that are crucial for a sustainable future. We cannot let this opportunity escape us. One of the most acute challenges of the biodiversity agenda is to protect and restore tropical forests. On a relatively limited area, they host more than a third of the world's plants, animals, and insects. We now have a historic opportunity to halt and reverse tropical deforestation. Several forest countries are moving strongly to slash their deforestation rates. A strong coalition of private companies are signaling willingness to pay for those results. Standards to ensure that emissions reductions are real, additional, and lasting now exist. Institutions to help markets function smoothly have been established. Financing tropical forests is among the best investments humanity can make. By the Biodiversity COP in Kunming and the Climate COP in Glasgow next fall, let us put in place a coalition to end tropical deforestation once and for all. This will take political will, billions of dollars in annual finance, and objective standards of performance. It will definitely be worth the effort. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to speak to you. This pandemic has exposed our vulnerabilities, economically, of course, but it is also a warning of worse consequences to come from our abuse of the natural world. From ocean giants to chameleons small enough to sit on the head of a match, populations of animals have declined by a staggering 2/3 in my lifetime. Reversing that trend is the principal challenge of our age, not only because it is a tragedy in and of itself, but because we all depend fundamentally on the free but rarely valued services that nature provides, as Professor Dasgupta's interim report sets out so powerfully. That, of course, is especially true of the world's poorest communities, who depend most directly on the forests that we're cutting down at a rate of 40 football pitches per minute, and the fish, whose marine environment we are simply exhausting. But we also need to tackle deforestation because it is the second biggest source of carbon emissions. Indeed, there is no pathway to net zero emissions without ramping up our efforts to protect and restore nature on an unprecedented scale. Nature-based solutions could provide around 1/3 of the cost-effective solutions we need by 2030, and yet they attract just 3% of global climate investment. So governments need to step up. As COP26 presidents, we are making nature a priority. We're also committed to securing ambitious goals and targets for biodiversity at the CBD COP15. And putting our money where our mouth is, we have doubled our international climate finance to 11.6 billion. As part of this increase, we will be increasing our spend on nature and asking other countries to do similar. But we know that public money alone will not be enough. So in addition, we need to work together to tackle some of the perverse incentives around finance and forests that make destructive practices in forests outpace sustainable ones by around 40-1. The top 50 food-producing countries spend over $700 billion a year in support for often destructive land use. That's around 4 times all of the world's aid agencies combined. In the UK, we're removing damaging subsidies and replacing them with a system that rewards environmental stewardship. We're encouraging other countries to take similar action. And we're working to remove deforestation from our supply chains. And again, we're encouraging other countries to work closely with us. Finally, governments have put aside trillions of dollars to reboot their economies. We can choose to use that money to prop up the status quo, locking in decades of environmental destruction and carbon emissions, or we can turn this appalling experience to something good, and we can make sustainability and resilience the lens through which we map out our respective recoveries. This is clearly the moment for a seismic shift, to reset our relationship with this, the only planet that can sustain us. Thank you very much.
Of course, all of these commitments need to have a real impact on the ground. Over 1 million species are predicted to go extinct if we do nothing. Let's hear from people in the field who are doing some amazing work to safeguard the vast diversity of life that we all love and depend on.
There are very wild areas which are very important for ecosystems services, but most of those areas are compromised because in most cases you find in developing countries, they do not have the capacity to properly manage the protected areas. So financing will be a major input in terms of trying to make sure that the wild areas are properly managed.
Les saludo desde el Cahuéscar West para manifestar la necesidad de aumentar los esfuerzos y los recursos y las iniciativas para tratar de proteger el planeta y los territorios indígenas que van a ser el sostén de las generaciones venideras.
This pact is critical for safeguarding Indonesia biodiversity, including the critically endangered Sumatran tigers, rhino, elephant, and orangutans. However, financial support for the park management is disproportionately small compared to the multitude benefit it provides. So, if park management to be effective and these benefits sustained, then improved funding and planning are urgently needed.
In collaboration with the Rwandan government over the last 10 years, Akigera has seen a revival. This has been made possible by the donor support through African Parks and the Rwandan government. Some of the key milestones are the reintroduction of the black rhinos and lions, making Akigera a Big Five reserve, and also attracting tourism and seeing a growth of 170% in the last 10 years. This growth made Akigera 80% self-financing. This has also encouraged employment, and we've become the biggest employer in the region.
West Papua is one of Indonesia's greenest provinces. The local government and communities are committed to protect intact forests and ocean by adopting the Conservation Province Agenda. The new development paradigm requires significant biodiversity finance that will allow the province achieve conservation goals while building local economy.
The world has been showing us the crucial importance of preservation of nature, of preservation of biodiversity. The life of the planet, economic prosperity and well-being, the life of our children depend heavily on it. That requires significant financial investment of nations, governments, and people. We need to make the biggest financial effort where our priorities are.
Governments alone cannot solve the crisis facing nature. It's also important that philanthropists work together to target their funding efforts where it will count most. Let's hear what commitments some of the world's leading nature philanthropists are making to biodiversity.
Dear friends of the Earth, in 2018 I made a 10-year, $1 billion pledge to support locally driven place-based conservation projects across the globe. Since then, we have worked on 4 continents, protecting beauty, protecting biodiversity, protecting landscapes that were on the threat of disappearing, to development, to climate change, to non-natural forces. We need to accelerate the pace of conservation across the world, and we have the only way to build a natural, sustainable, biological economy is by protecting more than 30% of the planet at this time. Hopefully, we will get to E.O. Wilson's goal of protecting half the planet, which is really needed if we want to have the type of life, the type of biodiversity, the type of beauty that we've experienced since mankind came onto this earth. Thank you all for supporting me, and thank you all for working together to get to 3030.
Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the importance of financing nature conservation. Rob and I share a passion for conservation that grew from our family's deep attachment to the land in Northwest Arkansas and the Great Plains of Montana and North Dakota. We believe people and the earth need to be in balance, and we're all connected by the planet we share. Our work on sustainability is rooted in our experience that people and organizations have far greater impact working together than on their own. A world without nature would be one devoid of all that sustains us and the wonder and inspiration that feeds our soul. So we must all do our part to reduce the loss of biodiversity and protect the health of the planet on which every life depends. Right now, there is an urgent need for financial resources, as world leaders negotiate new biodiversity targets. This funding will conserve critical land and ocean ecosystems and help local communities steward our natural world for the benefit of all.
We envision a future when people don't degrade the environment, they improve it. Nature must be nurtured to benefit current and future generations. Sustained financial support can build on past conservation gains and prevent further biodiversity loss. Together with conservation organization African Parks, we're protecting wildlife today to improve millions of lives tomorrow. And we're joining a German government pilot program, the Legacy Landscapes Fund, to ensure long-term financial support for the world's most important protected areas. Partnering with Conservation International, we've helped safeguard some of those places. Novel financial initiatives like the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund and Blue Nature Alliance demonstrate that the right actions, with support from governments, private foundations, and communities, are helping nature recover. Now it's time for strong actions and financing to conserve biodiversity and protect the ecosystems we depend on. Thank you for encouraging governments, foundations, and businesses to provide these crucial resources.
I'm Julie Packard. I'm standing here on the deck of the Monterey Bay Aquarium in coastal California. The haze you see behind me isn't just our normal coastal fog. It's smoke from the historic fire season we're experiencing here in California. The growing intensity of natural disasters around the world is a stark reminder of the urgency to protect and restore the nature that's going to help us weather the climate change storm. The ocean covers 70% of Earth, and it contains more than 99% of the living space. It provides food and livelihoods to billions of people. It drives global climate. And healthy coastal ecosystems protect vulnerable populations from the ravages of intense storms. As land dwellers, we've ignored the ocean for way too long, and we've invested too little in keeping it healthy. The good news is this: the ocean is resilient, and it can recover quickly if we give it half a chance. And we can point to success stories. The greatest successes result when businesses, governments, and philanthropy come together to work with local communities. Together, we can improve the health of the ocean and the people who depend on it. Here's a powerful example. In Vietnam's Mekong River Delta, tens of thousands of small-scale shrimp farmers are shifting their practices to achieve sustainable production targets by 2025. This is the result of a collaboration among NGOs, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium, national and regional governments, international businesses, and philanthropies, like the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, that have supported the sustainable seafood movement for 2 decades now. The outcome will be more resilient ecosystems and better lives for farming families as they gain access to global markets. Similar collaborations in fishing and aquaculture are driving change in the Philippines, India, and around the world. Everyone needs to benefit as we build a more sustainable world, and the ocean must be a big part of the solution. As we strive to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals 30 by 30 to protect 30% of the planet by 2030, collaborations like these are going to get us there.
Hello, this is Eileen Lee, and I lead the Environmental Conservation Program at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Since the foundation was started 20 years ago, we've invested close to $2 billion in the conservation of globally important intact natural ecosystems as reservoirs for biodiversity and life support systems for humanity. We're excited to be part of this Nature Finance Forum because scaling up financing is one of the most critical things we can do to achieve conservation on the scale that we need. The foundation has had the privilege to be involved in a number of landmark conservation financing projects, including Forever Costa Rica, ARPA for Life, Peru's Natural Legacy, and the Great Bear Rainforest Initiative. Each of these efforts demonstrated how multi-party public-private collaboratives that mobilize financing for nature can unlock greater levels of ambition for conservation and deliver more durable results for critical ecosystems and the people who depend upon them. I look forward to working together as we rise to meet the challenge of mobilizing finance for nature.
Indigenous peoples have historically been among the best stewards of nature we have, but they haven't received much of the finance for nature conservation. Let's hear more about how we can support their efforts around the world.
I come from a place with incredible biodiversity and cultural diversity, yet we see the danger signs everywhere, declines in salmon and red cedar. Many conservation efforts have followed an imposed colonial model, but now Indigenous nations across Canada are asserting our rights and responsibilities, and we are establishing Indigenous protected and conserved areas that reflect our laws and traditions. In Canada and also in Australia, some of the biggest proposals for protecting lands are led by Indigenous peoples. These Indigenous-led initiatives are a model for Canada and a gift to the world. That's why implementing the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People in Canada is crucial to honoring the country's biodiversity commitments. This is how we ensure our planet can sustain our future generations. If we take care of the land will take care of us. Thank you. Wallace Gaasika.
Smart businesses understand their dependence on nature. They are investing in solutions to the biodiversity crisis and responding to consumers who are demanding more sustainable products and services. The world is looking to the business community to see beyond short-term bottom-line interests and to work with governments to be part of the solution to our nature crisis. Let's hear how some companies are responding.
Well, hello everybody. It's fantastic to be part of such an important event. The COVID crisis has shown us that nature, health, inequality, and the economy are all interrelated, and that people are at the very center. No healthy people on an unhealthy planet. The only way to slow and stop global biodiversity loss is to ensure that nature is actually valued in all of our decisions, as outlined in a recent report by the Paulson Institute and the Nature Conservatory. The estimated biodiversity financing gap, which is the gap between the amount currently spent on biodiversity conservation and what is actually needed, is estimated to be between roughly US $600 billion and $800 billion. About the same as the total US defense spending, to put it in perspective. With nature-based services worth well over 100 trillion, you agree with me that this is a very small investment to make. To close this gap and ensure that nature is at the front and center of decision-making, we need industry-wide multi-stakeholder partnerships coupled with sufficient financing. More than anything though, we need bold government action and for nature policies to be reformed to reduce negative impacts on biodiversity. Governments need to put in place the right regulatory framework, smarter incentives, and market structures to catalyze financial flow from the public and private sector into biodiversity action. This need for smarter and more nature-centric policies already has broad corporate support. In fact, Business for Nature has announced that more than 500 companies with a combined revenue of around $4 trillion, including companies like Walmart, Microsoft, Unilever, Mahindra, H&M, they're all urging governments to adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. Now, this all gives us reasons to be hopeful. Through government leadership, alongside business action and investments, we can create the cleaner, greener jobs, deliver circular products and processes by design, and make more sustainable products for all. Together we can and we must protect, restore, and sustainably use our natural resources. Thank you very much.
Healthy societies, resilient economies, and thriving businesses rely on nature. The health of our planet has reached a dangerous tipping point with the massive loss of nature and biodiversity we're seeing, not only putting habitats and species at risk, but also threatening the economies and the livelihoods of millions of people. Nature loss is a threat to human extinction equal to that of climate change. And for Unilever, this issue is of the utmost importance. 2/3 of our raw materials that we use in our brands come from farms and from forests, agricultural sources that are dependent on nature. Our future success, both as a business and as a society, depends on our ability to tackle this critical issue. And that is why earlier this year, Unilever set out our plan to improve the health of the planet through a new set of integrated environmental commitments to fight the climate crisis and protect and regenerate nature. We're going to invest 1 billion euros in a new climate and nature fund. And over the next 10 years, we will put this money into high impact projects and initiatives, such as landscape restoration and wildlife protection, so we can help protect and restore the health of the planet. And this includes achieving a deforestation-free supply chain by 2023. We will also introduce a regenerative agricultural code for all of our suppliers to empower and equip a new generation of farmers and smallholders to regenerate their farm environment, including providing access to finance. These commitments, however, will not be enough to avert the environmental crisis we are facing. We need governments to adopt ambitious policies now that reverse nature loss in this decade. Specifically, this means reforming subsidies and incentives to promote nature-first policies. For example, creating mechanisms to value and pay for ecosystem services and reward natural resource managers. It also means embedding nature in decision-making and disclosure. To go further, we must work together, and Unilever stands ready to work alongside governments and civil society to reverse nature loss this decade. It's a critical year for the future of our planet, and we must take this opportunity now.
Nature-based solutions have the potential to attract private capital in order to meet sustainable development goals. At Mirova, which is a private fund management company and also an affiliate of Natixis Investment Managers, we have already turned this potential into concrete and tangible actions. We have already financed 4 transformative land restoration projects that are able to deliver superior environmental and social benefits on the ground while also having attractive financial performance potential. Project examples range from sustainable agroforestry producing sustainable coffee in Peru or hazelnuts in Bhutan, to innovative forestry in Ghana or Kenya with the use of technology giving access that is facilitated for smallholders. There are also many talented entrepreneurs with proven business models that need long-term finance to scale up what already works. We're also working with indigenous communities in Nicaragua to restore degraded forests or standing ones that need protections. Developing this promising portfolio of projects has allowed us to attract private money from North America, typical pension funds from North America, or insurance companies in Europe. But these private investments have been enabled basically by public money from governments of France, Luxembourg, the UK, and also by philanthropy. What did this public money do? Basically, they just help de-risk investments for the private sectors. Our goal is to raise more than $1 billion by 2022 dedicated to nature. By doing so, we will be able to demonstrate that finance can help protect and restore nature.
Over the last decade, the media spotlight has rightly shone a light on the devastating impact the degradation of the environment is having on all of our lives. And I think all businesses have got a responsibility, particularly as consumers of resource, so much resource from the environment, to act and do their bit. At Sky, we've been carbon neutral since 2006. We announced last year that we would become net zero carbon by 2030. And in 2017, we launched Sky Ocean Rescue, our campaign to restore the health of the oceans. In addition to that, though, we launched Sky Ocean Ventures Fund. That is our own investment fund where we are working with small businesses who are working in the supply chain to develop the sort of solutions to single-use plastic that will really help ocean health over the next coming decades. We provide not just money and funding, but resource and access to Sky, all of the capabilities we have here to support these early phase startups to help get them off of the ground. So hopefully in time, they can become successful businesses in their own right. So for businesses as a whole, I'd say this: you've got to get involved. You've got to do something. You've got to focus on your own environmental footprint, but also finding new ways to help other businesses, particularly small businesses who are in need of capital and resource, in ways where you can make a difference and use your broader footprint. Mimic what we've done or find your own even better idea. Finally, I'd just like to say how grateful we are all to working with the small businesses who are part of Sky Ocean Ventures. And I'm really hoping over the years ahead, we'll find them emerge into successful new businesses who are having a big impact on the fight to save our oceans and climate change. Because of course we all know that time is running out and now we need to act.
At BNP Paribas, we have put the 17 SDGs in our corporate platform, and we have an agreement with UN to channel 10 billion of private and public capital to environmentally and socially groundbreaking projects. We believe that SDG 14, the one related to ocean, is absolutely essential, and that it is the right momentum to create a fund dedicated to coral reefs. In such a fund, BNP Paribas or a bank like BNP Paribas can bring its network to gather institutions, to gather investors that are not only looking for financial returns. Cooperation with the UN and with the public sector is important to bring those investors guarantees. And if everybody is working together, we can really find solutions and have a real financial response to the problem, the very important problem of coral reefs.
Hey, this is Edward Norton. I'm the United Nations Goodwill Ambassador for Biodiversity. 2 minutes is short, so let me be quick. I don't think anybody attending here today needs to be persuaded as to the economic value of healthy natural systems and biodiversity. Every day we're seeing, to the tune of trillions of dollars, the economic cost of carbon loading of the atmosphere, fires, floods, biodiversity collapse, on and on and on. So obviously, we need to accurately account for the value of nature, and we need to build that into our finance and economic matrix. But how do we do that with more acceleration and more speed? Because acceleration and speed and scale are the challenges of the moment. I'd like to focus on one thing, which is lots of voluntary corporate leaders are recognizing that they want to move their businesses toward carbon neutral, and they're using carbon offsets as a mechanism, which is terrific, a terrific thing. We built the Chulu Hills Carbon Trust, was the first indigenous community-owned REDD plus VCS standard project in the world, and we sell those credits to some terrific partners. But $6 a ton is BS, and we know it. Everybody knows it. It doesn't underwrite the implementations of the mitigations that generate the offsets. Conservation International just came out with a very compelling white paper arguing for no less than $15 a ton. We all know that $5, $6 a ton is driven by folks like BP who are holding those credits, not retiring in them, trying to arb the value of them forward. Corporate leaders who are going to use carbon offsets to neutralize the impacts of their business need to purchase at the authentic price of the mitigation, and that is no less than $15 a ton. I would love to open up that argument, but we need to move beyond this suppressed market price of carbon. We need corporations to voluntarily say we are not going to claim a ton of offset if we have not paid the full price of the actions that generate that offset, and we need national policy to follow suit. We need to sell carbon at the appropriate price, and I'm going to throw down that challenge as my thought of the day. Price carbon at the authentic cost of offsetting it. That's not $6 a ton. It's closer to 15. Let's discuss.
Lastly, let's hear from leaders of several key multilateral organizations to help synthesize what we've heard and talk about what we must do next.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the statistics on nature are sobering. We lost a staggering 68% of wildlife since 1970, and we lose forests that are bigger in size than Denmark every year. But beyond the gloomy headlines, I see concrete reasons for also being hopeful. Firstly, I take hope from our ability to act as one world, with shared determination and purpose. We are in fact on track to achieve the ambitious goal on protected area coverage that we set for ourselves in the year 2010. Secondly, while the cost of inaction on nature is profound, the economic cost of investing in nature is relatively trivial. We currently spend less than 100 billion a year on nature, about what we spend on pet food globally. We only need an additional 700 billion annually to achieve our ambitious biodiversity goals for the year 2030. That's less than 1% of global GDP, and only a fraction of the 5.2 trillion that we spend on fossil fuel subsidies every year, even this year. And we know that people do want their money to go towards the protection of our natural world, but the current financial system is simply not fit for purpose. As the UN Secretary General's Digital Financing Task Force on SDGs and financing has just pointed out, digital finance or fintech holds enormous potential to expand financial inclusion by giving people choice and power over their money. Indeed, the announcement of a brand new UN multi-partner trust fund for coral reefs that seeks to raise $500 million for coral reef restoration is an indication of the profound shifts in financing that are now beginning to emerge. It gives me great hope that we are starting to see the emergence of collective will by governments, philanthropists, businesses, financial institutions, communities and civil society to work together to fill this critical financing gap for nature, for our future, and for life, for all of us. Thank you.
Hi, dear friends from around the world. This is Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the CEO from the GEF. Today, COVID-19 has shown us that we can no longer manage environment and economic pressures separately. It has given us a once-in-a-lifetime chance to reset our relationship with nature and scale up investment in nature-based solutions that can help us with our forests, land, and oceans to absorb more carbon and protect more biodiversity. We all need to recognize that it's in our own self-interest to protect nature, because nobody can prosper on a sick planet. And when nature becomes the driver for economic growth, jobs, and income, then nature will be hand in hand with human development. The institution I lead, the Global Environmental Facility, is working with developing countries to address the drivers of environmental degradation. We no longer just try to remedy the after effect of bad choices or bad policies. So if we're able to make real progress towards global targets to tame emissions and preserve biodiversity, we need to achieve four crucial goals. Number one, we must mobilize financial resources from all sources. Second, we must reduce the flow of government and financial funds into environmental damaging sectors of the economy. Third, government must pave the way for more private investment by changing regulations, policies, incentives, and disincentives. And fourth, we must prove to government that preserving the environment is in their own political and self-interest. A greener, more sustainable future is in our hands, and if we commit to prioritizing nature as the core of our well-being, we must act today collectively, comprehensively. We must act now. Thank you so much.
Hello friends, I'm Cristiana Figueres and I am delighted to join the Campaign for Nature for many reasons, not least of which is that addressing climate change and protecting our biodiversity are not only interdependent of each other, they are actually two sides of the same coin. They go so hand in hand that they are completely inseparable, which is why we have to very urgently develop the financial models and the financial willingness to allow us to protect 30% of our surface, including oceans and soils, by 2030. It is a must. We must do it, and we can.
As you can see, there's a wide range of people championing a major paradigm shift that will put the protection of nature at the core of the global economy. But that's not enough. Over the next year, we need more world leaders to join this effort, and we need to make sure finance for nature gets to communities at the epicenter of conservation. This Nature Finance Forum is the first step, and we will continue with more convenings in the months ahead. If we don't protect nature, we will have nothing. Now is the time to show ourselves who we really are. People who understand that without the planet and the delicate ecology that powers it and all the living creatures in it, then we are nothing. Thank you.